Now we finally get to the point where we can refactor our routing. So currently, for the routing, we're using v-for directive to determine which page should be displayed at the current moment. But as you can see currently, in Vue Developer Tools, all our page components are contained in the DOM, and that is the timeline, the activities, and the progress components. And if we go to the root component here in the template, we can see that we are determining which component to display based on the value of the current page, and by using vShowDirective. And as we know, vShowDirective is not going to remove component completely from the DOM tree. It will just hide component with CSS in a case when condition inside vShowDirective will turn to false. And this is actually a good use case to use dynamic component. Whenever in a project we're having such case when we're checking the value of some variable, and based on the result, we should display certain component. In this case, it will be a good fit to use dynamic component. And one dynamic component is already used in our project, that is to display icons for navigation links inside NavItem component. So in here we are determining which dynamic component to display based on the icon property of NavItem object. So let's just use the same technique and apply dynamic component for our routing inside app component. Let's write in here component and use isAttribute. And now we need to decide what we're gonna put in this attribute. For now, I'm going to write code up front, which is not going to work just yet, but we're gonna make it work soon. So let's just decide which page component to display at some point in time based on the current page reactive variable, and we're gonna use value of this reactive variable as a key of routes object, which is going to contain all our pages. So now let's scroll up and add an import statement for the routes object, and now these imports that are dimmed we're going to transfer to router.js module. Let's also copy over these three import statements. And now we get to decide which shape routes object will have. So let's just do this. Every key of this object will correspond to a particular page name, and as for these names we can use page constants. And as for the value for every key, we're going to use specific page component. So for the first page, we'll use the timeline component. For the activities page, the activities component. And finally, for the last page, the progress component. And now such object structure perfectly fits our condition that we have wrote inside this attribute is. So depending on which page current page variable will store, we're going to extract correct page component out of routes object and use it to display for this dynamic component. And then dynamic component will take care of the rest and properly show certain page component. So let's just remove this commented code and check the whole result in a browser. We're just going to switch between different pages and make sure that we are still able to do so. And looks like everything is working, but there is one thing that doesn't work as expected yet. So let's just do this. I'm going to start stopwatch in here and then switch over to a different page and come back to timeline page. And in this case, as we can see, stopwatch was stopped automatically. So what is actually happening in here is that whenever we switch between page components, every time old page components got destroyed, along with all the components inside those page components. So this means all the descendant components of the page component is going to lose its state along with the page component. And that is actually the reason why stopwatch component loses its state and stops automatically when we come back to timeline page. And please note, now that we are using dynamic component to implement routing, only one page component exists in component tree at a time. So what we have to do in this case, in order to prevent components from losing their state when another dynamic component gets activated whenever we are switching between different pages, is to actually wrap our dynamic component in another component that is also provided by Vue. This component is called keepAlive. So let's just wrap our dynamic component within this component. And now inside Vue Developer Tools, we can see that our page component is wrapped by keepAlive component. And this keepAlive component is going to cache the state of all components that will be replaced by another page component whenever we go to a different page. And anytime we're going to come back to timeline page, which means the timeline component will be activated again. Keep alive component is actually going to restore the state of all descendant components as well as the current page component. And which is why now if we start the stopwatch and then go to the different page and come back to timeline page, we can see that this stopwatch will still be running. So the state of the stopwatch was persisted between page loads. And one of the state variables of timeline stopwatch component is this isRunning variable, which will have numeric value when our stopwatch is running. And let's just see what is going to happen to this local state variable when we will switch over to different page and then come back to timeline page. So isRunning variable still stores numeric value. That means previous state was cached and now it is restored when timeline page component was activated again. And this is how we can use keep alive component along with dynamic components to persist, or in other words, cache the state of dynamic components that get deactivated and replaced with another dynamic components, so that next time when those dynamic components will get activated again, their previous state will be restored.